When I was a child, I was fascinated by entomology. I had beautiful books, caught different bugs, and spent hours identifying them in insect guides. I even went on entomological trips, at first with my dad, but as I got older, I started going alone. I explored different places, mostly outside the city. Each location had its own unique bugs, but the greatest variety I discovered was in the swampy undergrowth near the river. If I peeled back the bark of an old, rotting tree, hundreds of tiny creatures would spill out. Stink bugs, pupae, bark beetles, and, if I was lucky, a couple of magnificent longhorn beetles. That was all I needed to be happy. Searching for them meant wading knee-deep in mud, so I never even tried to keep any part of myself clean. I'd return home, put my findings in jars, and head straight for the shower. All right, enough preamble. I was around 12 years old when I went on yet another trip. I found a perfect tree near the road and got to work. Every 10 minutes, I'd tear off a piece of bark and collect what fell out. For convenience, I lay parallel to the tree in the mud, glancing through the gap between the trunk and the ground to keep an eye on the road. Maybe 2 or 3 cars passed per hour, along with the occasional pedestrian. Then, I heard footsteps. Several people. There were 2 large men, one just big and strong, the other unbelievably massive, a plain-looking elderly woman, an unattractive middle-aged man and woman, and a teenage girl, about 15 years old. They walked slowly, scanning their surroundings. About 30 meters from where I lay, they stopped, completely silent. That struck me as odd. Then, in perfect unison, all but 2 of them, the large man and the unattractive woman, walked into the forest on the opposite side of the road. I watched the remaining 2 for a minute, then went back to my jars. I finished one section and started tearing at another piece of bark. It cracked loudly. Suddenly I saw the 2 people on the road snap to attention, their faces turning stone cold as they stared toward the forest. Fear gripped me. I pressed myself deeper under the tree and went completely still. A minute later, the elderly woman emerged from the forest, her clothes completely covered in dirt. She looked at the 2 on the road, exchanged glances with them, then silently turned and went back into the trees. I lay there in terror for another 10 minutes. Then, a long-distance bus pulled up, and a group of people got off, heading in our direction. A cheerful young couple walked hand in hand, chatting and laughing. An old man in a suit trailed behind them, followed by an incredibly beautiful young woman, about 18 years old, holding an infant. The baby's head was covered in green antiseptic. They walked about 100 meters from the bus stop toward where the 2 people were standing. Just as they were about to pass them, the large man and the unattractive woman suddenly pounced on the young couple, covering their mouths or choking them. I couldn't tell exactly, since they had their backs to me. Meanwhile, the old man and the beautiful girl helped by twisting their arms behind their backs. The attack was terrifyingly coordinated and completely silent. There was no struggle. Within 3 seconds, the young couple, now weakly but desperately moaning, were dragged into the forest. As soon as they disappeared, I seized the moment and ran home. I never called the police. By the time I got back, 2 hours had passed, and it felt too late. I didn't tell my parents either. Who would believe a criminal group with unknown motives, consisting of children, women, and elderly people? For years, I agonized over whether I had done the right thing, if I could have helped. But I always came to the same conclusion. I had done the only thing that made sense. I was convinced they had people in the police. More than 10 years have passed since then. My memories have dulled, and I've gone through dozens of theories. Anything from a simple criminal gang to a full-blown Masonic conspiracy. But recently, something happened that shattered all my rational attempts to explain it. I was riding in a minibus, reading a book. I looked up, and there, sitting across from me, was that same massive man and the beautiful young woman, still 18, holding a baby whose head was covered in green antiseptic. I got off at the very next stop. I am terrified, more than ever, just like I was under that tree, lying in the mud. Good day to you. Let me warn the romantic girls, impressionable boys, and those seeking unbearable horror and trembling knees right away. I will write a lot, in detail, and without ghosts or spirits. To give you a bit of context about myself, I've lived for a quarter of a century, I work, and I'm finishing my studies. My only passion is military affairs, and not just looking at pictures or watching movies. I experience everything firsthand. I know how to survive in the forest, how to approach you in a way that you wouldn't even realize I'm there. No, I'm not bragging. I'm describing all this to prevent misunderstandings and unnecessary questions. Now, the story itself. I live between Serpukhov and Moscow in a small town, specifically in its village part. A railroad and a garage cooperative separate the village from the town itself. Beyond the village, there are several ponds and a forest. At the edge of the forest, there is an old military zone, a couple of trenches, a radar embankment, and most importantly, a dot structure, a concrete bunker with a single entrance. It looks like a small mound with a broken black opening. In reality, it has many rooms inside. Of course, everything inside has long been looted, burned, and covered in graffiti. One Sunday evening, my friends and I decided to gather around a fire, grill some meat, and simply relax before Monday. We arrived at my favorite bunker. I liked that place. No people at all, a pond nearby. We gathered firewood, lit a fire, and sat around talking. It was early spring, and dusk was settling in. No one wanted to leave just yet, so we decided to stay up late and then spend the night at my place. I live alone in a big house, so there was plenty of room. We sat there, telling stories, enjoying the peaceful atmosphere. And then, something started bothering me. No reason, just an unsettling feeling. My friends either didn't feel anything or didn't show it. But I've learned to trust my instincts. This kind of unease had saved me from danger more than once. I got up, leaned against a tree, and slowly withdrew from the conversation without drawing attention. Gradually, I stepped out of the firelight. It had already grown quite dark, but the anxiety only intensified. Fear began creeping in. Now, fear is a useful feeling. It keeps you alive. But this kind of fear, without an obvious cause, is the worst kind. I stood behind the tree, letting my eyes adjust to the darkness, scanning the surroundings. Nothing seemed unusual, just the forest, a light breeze, the pond, and the distant glow of the city. Then I noticed something. On the embankment behind me, the one over the bunker entrance, there was a patch of grass that looked darker than the rest. Instinct kicked in. I decided to investigate carefully. I crouched low, circled the mound from the right, and slowly crawled into a position where I could see what was lurking there. I should have just gone home. Lying in the grass, staring at my friends, was a creature. And I say creature because I know human anatomy well, and this was no human. Its neck was unnaturally bent. Its front limbs held what looked like two knives or hooks. I couldn't quite tell. Its legs had two knee joints, looking as if they had been broken. The creature was completely still and made no sound, but its gaze was fixed on the fire and my friends. A surge of adrenaline flooded my veins. My heart pounded so hard, I was amazed it didn't give me away. My hand instinctively moved to the knife on my belt, and then a terrifying thought struck me. What if I don't kill it instantly? What then? It'll tear me apart. Slowly, I slid back down the slope, rose to my feet, and returned to the fire. Just as I had planned, no one had noticed my absence. With 2 quick sentences, I signaled to my friends that we needed to leave, immediately. Since we all shared the same military interest, I didn't need to explain outright. A couple of coded words in a casual sentence were enough for them to understand without raising alarm. Without showing any sign that I had discovered something, I put out the fire, grabbed my bag, and started walking along the path. My friends did the same. We moved quickly, silently, and without looking back, exactly as protocol demanded. I understood one thing. The creature wasn't attacking us yet. If it had intended to kill us, it would have done so already. It wasn't hiding out of fear. It was watching. Once we reached the well-lit road in the village, I was the first to break the silence. I told them I had seen a man with a weapon, maybe a hunter, who had been watching us for a long time. No one responded. Maybe they didn't believe me, but no one argued either. They knew I wouldn't joke about something like that. No one ever mentioned that night again. But I couldn't forget. That creature, its mere existence, shattered everything I thought I knew about the world. It didn't do anything to us. It didn't have to. Just knowing it was real was enough to change me forever. Since then, I've added a few new items to the things I always carry. A forged iron rod for warding off evil, a pouch of protective earth, and other old grandma's nonsense. Now I know that danger doesn't just come from humans. I wrote this with mixed feelings. Even now, I feel too many emotions at once. I just needed to get it off my chest, so I'm sharing it with you. There's something to fear in the forest. If people laugh at you for glancing nervously at a dark path, for peering into the trees, for tensing up at the sound of a sudden rustle, let them laugh. You're doing the right thing. This strange story happened to me in my distant youth, in either 1977 or 1978. I was still very young, 22 or 23 years old. At that time, I lived in the north of the Tomsk region, in the developing oil town of Strezhevoy. Back then, it wasn't really a town yet, not even a shadow of one. Just a few dozen tiny temporary houses, the same number of trailers sunk deep into the swampy mud, about 10 single-story wooden barracks serving as dormitories for oil workers, and another dozen large tents with small stoves inside, where people even lived during the winter. Strezhevoy was being built near the Ob River, on its tributary, the Posol River. The houses and plank roads were constructed on swamps that had been somewhat drained with trenches. Day and night, massive trucks hauled sand from the banks of the Ob, filling in the land for the future town. Around Strezhevoy stretched untouched taiga, full of cranberry bogs. The land was rich: berries, mushrooms, pine nuts. In the Ob and its tributaries, the fish practically jumped into buckets. There was all kinds: muksun, nelma, sterlet. It was as common as roachfish is today, if not more. I was a village girl, hard-working, still am. Of course, I couldn't just ignore all this abundance. It was a beautiful golden autumn. Weather like that only happens in Siberia. The berries near the town were so plentiful that you could scoop them up with a shovel. I had already made plenty of jams from blueberries, cloudberries, and bilberries. And by the time of this story, the cranberries had ripened. I chose a warm, sunny day, packed up, and went berry picking. Getting ready was easier said than done. Preparing for a trip into the taiga is no simple task. Rubber boots with comfortable socks, a thick tick-proof suit, a hat with a mosquito net, and preferably, on top of the jacket, a mesh shirt soaked in tar. The gnats in the taiga are so thick until late autumn that breathing freely is risky. You'll definitely swallow a few. I took a small backpack with a bucket inside, along with a piece of bread and a bottle of water. I didn't have to go far. After about 2 kilometers of rough terrain, I reached a vast swamp covered in thick Labrador tea bushes and sparse dried-out pines. The cranberries started right at the swamp's edge, but picking them among the tangled branches was inconvenient. I had picked cranberries here before, so I knew from experience that the best ones were deeper in, where the moss was clear, and the berries lay like cushions. Easy to pick, fast to gather, and without debris. As I slowly moved deeper into the swamp, I reached a relatively clear patch, and my bucket began to fill much faster. I never liked, and still don't like, those special berry combs. They collect more trash than berries. Within a couple of hours, my 12-liter bucket was overflowing. I found a high hummock, set my backpack on it, and carefully poured the berries in. On a nearby tree, I tied a bright piece of cloth I had brought for this purpose. Then, I moved a bit further and resumed picking. The berries kept tempting me. The further I went, the bigger they got. Slowly making my way deeper into the swamp, I had already filled more than half of my second bucket when something terrifying happened. Something that I'm telling this story for. I stepped onto what looked like firm moss, and suddenly, I fell through. I plunged into ice-cold, semi-liquid mud, sinking almost to my waist in an instant. At first, I wasn't even scared. I jerked upward with all my strength, trying to push myself out using the bucket, but the bucket disappeared into the depths just as easily. Then, sheer terror gripped me. My voice vanished from the overwhelming fear. As I struggled in the foul, icy mud, I sank even deeper. Finally, I stopped thrashing and forced myself to calm down. I was young, full of life. I just couldn't believe I would die such a ridiculous and horrible death. I stood there in the swamp, like a post, slowly but inevitably sinking further. After catching my breath, I stretched out my body, trying to grab onto anything: grass, moss, Labrador tea bushes, but everything ripped out in my hands. That's when I started screaming. No, not just screaming. I was howling as if I were being torn apart alive, but my cries went unheard. There was no one around. My lower body had long gone numb from the cold, and yet, as I sank nearly to my armpits, I suddenly felt something solid under my feet. Maybe wood, maybe firm ground, but the sinking stopped. That was little comfort, though. The greedy swamp held me tight. It wasn't swallowing me further, but it wasn't letting me go either. I cried and prayed. I rasped, my voice breaking, hoping someone might hear. But the northern autumn days are short. The sun was slowly setting. Warmth was fading, replaced by a swarm of gnats, making my torment even worse. A thin, dry pine stood just 2 meters away, but it was as unreachable as the sun, which was now disappearing beyond the dense taiga. Exhausted from pleading and crying, I think I fell into a daze. A fleeting thought crossed my mind. Might as well just sink all the way. It's the same ending anyway. That thought must have snapped me out of my stupor. I jerked my whole body, shaking myself awake. Then suddenly words came to me. Unexpected, unfamiliar. I don't know why, but I screamed with the last of my hoarse voice. "Swamp spirit, merciful master, save me, help me. Pity my little daughter. She's only 2 years old. Don't leave her an orphan. I swear to you I will never take a single berry without your permission. I will never leave even a scrap of trash in the forest. Forgive me. Save me." I sobbed and pleaded like this for 10 minutes or more. And then, a miracle. The dry pine creaked at its base and fell, right towards me. I barely managed to turn my head as it landed beside me, its dry branches whipping across my face. A wild surge of hope rushed through me. I don't know where I found the strength in my frozen, exhausted body, but clinging to the trunk, I quickly pulled myself out of the swamp, though I left my boots and socks behind in its depths. Lying on a hummock next to my backpack, I laughed and cried, overwhelmed with gratitude. I thanked the Taiga spirit for saving me from a horrible death. I crawled home, wrapping my bare, numb feet with strips of my torn blouse. Of course, I left the berries behind on the hummock. Strangely enough, besides severe bronchitis, I didn't suffer any lasting illnesses. My young, strong body recovered. Since then, 40 years and counting, before stepping into the forest, I always greet the master of the woods. I ask for his permission before taking even a handful of berries or mushrooms. And when I leave, I always thank the forest spirit. One more thing. Neither I nor my family ever leave trash in the forest.